Diana's brother, Earl Spencer, did not hold back when he heard the news of her death. Speaking from his home in South Africa, he said, "I always believed the press would kill her in the end, but not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death as seems to be the case." At that time it was thought the paparazzi were entirely responsible for the accident, and he said that the editors and proprietors of every newspaper that had paid money for intrusive pictures of his sister had blood on their hands. Wherever the blame would finally be seen to lie, the industry took the Earl's message to heart. After heated debate about whether a privacy law was called for, the outcome was self-regulation, and a strict new code of conduct binding on every editor and publisher in Britain was drawn up by the Press Complaints Commission. Published in November 1997, it was designed to prevent all the excesses of the previous 10 years. Every aspect of intrusion that the prince and princess had suffered was covered, and the two boys were guaranteed privacy. For example, privacy I. Everyone is entitled to respect for his or her private and family life, home, health and correspondence. A publication will be expected to justify intrusions into any individual's private life without consent. E. The use of long-lens photography to take pictures of people in private places without their consent is unacceptable. Note: private places are public or private property where there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. Children I. Young people should be free to complete their time at school without unnecessary intrusion. E. Journalists must not interview or photograph children under the age of 16 on subjects involving the welfare of the child or of any other child, in the absence of or without the consent of a parent or other adult who is responsible for the children. E. Pupils must not be approached or photographed while at school without the permission of the school authorities. IV. Where material about the private life of a child is published, there must be justification for publication other than the fame, notoriety or position of his or her parents or guardian. Listening devices. Journalists must not obtain or publish material obtained by using clandestine listening devices or by intercepting private telephone conversations. In the light of evidence given to the Leveson inquiry, which began sitting in November 2011 in the wake of the News International phone hacking scandal, the 1997 Code of Conduct looks laughable, and perhaps it always was. For a time it kept William and Harry out of the newspapers, even if it didn't stop the paparazzi taking the photos. Sandy Henney has a photo of William that captures a wonderful moment. He has shot all the ducks at a funfair and is choosing what he'd like from the prizes hanging from the roof. They were being watched even though it was, "Leave the children alone," she says. "I had one fearful row with a particularly beastly editor in Fleet Street when he thought I was being ridiculously protective of the boys. I said, I've got my responsibilities. He said, I've got a load of photographs in my safe taken by Paps done at Eton. They were still at it, but because they didn't get published we weren't aware of it. But it was always going to be a balancing act. As the PCC made clear, that while their rights to privacy are the same as other children, Prince William and Prince Harry are different from them because of their proximity to the throne. As a result of this, the palace has always recognized that rigid application of the code with regard to the young princes, and an insistence on absolute privacy, would be unsustainable. There is legitimate public interest in news and information about the way in which the princes are growing up, and that includes the progress of their education. In such circumstances, a complete blackout on news would be contrary to the general public interest, and would undermine the authority of the code. There is a common view today that William hates the press, and given his experiences it would be surprising if he didn't. But while he did hate the newspapers for many years, both before and after his mother's death, it's no longer so straightforward. He knows enough about the institution of monarchy to realize that if it is to have a future, it needs to be seen to be relevant, which means being visible. He still hates the paparazzi, but he reads everything and remembers who writes what about him. Unlike his father who gave up reading anything but the Times years ago because they made him so cross. William will engage with the media in his way. He is extremely wary but utterly determined to remain in control. Control in all things is very important to William. Sandy tells the story of the first anniversary. The year after Diana died, They were going to have a service at Crathy Church, and William was adamant that if the press were going to be there, and you couldn't stop them being in the road, he didn't want to go, and I can understand that. The Prince of Wales asked me whether I would come and talk to them both. I said, okay, but I'm not going to say you've got to go. I'll give the pros and cons to them, but they make up their own minds. We went for a walk round Loch Nig and I said, okay, guys, why don't you want to go? Well, you know, the press are going to be there and we don't want to be gawped at. This was a year after their mum died, and bloody right, guys. But then you say, well, don't you think it would be a bit funny if everyone else turns up for a remembrance service for your mum and you don't? Well, yeah, says William, but first still don't want to go. Okay, but this is how it's going to be played out in the newspapers, but it's up to you to decide. I'm not telling you either way. And it was Harry who said, I think we should go. We need to be there and we need to support Papa and to support everyone else. I think I'm going to go, William, and William then said, yeah, you're right. I left them and said to the Prince, I've talked to them and they may well go, but, if so, it's their choice, but no one will ever say they were forced into doing it. They weren't forced, but William did make one condition. He would go, he said, if Sandy would issue an announcement calling for an end to the mourning. He agreed a text with her and she read it out on his behalf during the photo call on the first day of the Michaelmas half on the 2nd of September, when Harry joined him as a pupil at Eton. They have asked me to say that they believe their mother would want people now to move on, because she would have known that constant reminders of her death can create nothing but pain to those she left behind. They therefore hope very much that their mother and her memory will now finally be allowed to rest in peace. That June, William turned 16 and the Mail on Sunday published a special supplement about him. It was friendly and intended as a celebration, but it was speculative. Among many thousands of words, it claimed that palace aides vetted William's friends before they were invited to tea, which was nonsense. William was incensed and immediately instructed the press office to make a formal complaint on his behalf to the Press Complaints Commission. The claim, they said, was inaccurate and grossly intrusive. The complaint was upheld. His 16th birthday was an obvious landmark to be celebrated, and since the media had played ball with the palace, it was time for payback. You're getting at the moment, explained Sandy. But we've got to give them something. William took a lot of persuading. Eventually he agreed that she should come up with a list of questions to give to Peter Archer, a reporter who worked for the Press Association, which distributes news to every other media outlet. So one safe interview and some photographs. It was a bit anodyne, she says, but it filled their pages. Colleen Harris, who joined the press office as Sandy's deputy, 2 months earlier, the first black member of the household, was part of the persuasion process. I remember sitting with him, talking about the media plans for his 16th birthday, and I remember thinking, I wouldn't put up with this from my own children. I would just tell them, this is what you are doing. Why am I having to negotiate with a 15-year-old in this way? She laughs at the memory, but you did. That's William. You had to discuss it and justify why you were doing certain things and explain what was in it for him and what was in it for them, and then he would come to a decision. He very much wanted to live his own life. Most children at that age don't want all the flummery and fuss. They just want to do what they want to do, and I think it was the same for him. He couldn't quite understand why he had to put up with all this nonsense at that stage of his life. Why he had to do so much at such a young age, and I would argue he wasn't doing a lot of it. You're only doing a little, but to him it felt like a lot. Our job at that point was to protect them. That was Sandy's strategy. She said, let's just keep them out of the media. Give them private time. It was only for landmark things and the skiing trips, or when there was an incident or accident or something at school. Then we would have to organize the media. It was always challenging because they never wanted to do things, and it was quite hard for us. We wanted to promote these fantastic kids and let the world see them and see how wonderfully they were growing up, and they didn't want to. After those early skiing holidays in Lech with their mother, Closters became their regular haunt. Charles knew the runs like the back of his hand and had loved the place since he first went there in the 1970s. It had been the backdrop to some colorful and delightful photographs in the past, and the deal that evolved between the press office and the press was that the family would do one photo call at the beginning of the holiday and then be left alone. When Colleen arrived with them all for her first skiing trip, there was no snow on the mountains, so she postponed the photo call. But some of the media couldn't stay long enough for the weather to change, and so all the princes agreed to do an interim shot outside the hotel. Colleen made it clear that once there was some snow they would do the usual photo call for everyone else. They didn't hear that bit, she says, laughing. So when, after heavy snowfall that night, she announced the next morning that they were going to do a lovely photo call up in the mountains, some princes were more cooperative than others. I asked the Prince of Wales and he said, "Yes, absolutely fine, go ahead." You talk to William. So I had to go and chat to William. Harry was there as well. They were watching something on the telly. It was hysterical, a program called Bonsai which they would shout every so often. Harry kept bursting into laughter. The Prince of Wales was sitting in the corner reading, looking up at me. So I said, "We've got to do this photo call." William said, "No, we've done a photo call." "No, that was only for some of the media, the ones that had to leave. Now we need to do another one, otherwise you're going to have all the paparazzi following you around for the rest of the week. So let's just go and do a nice big one up the mountain." "No, I'm not doing it. Now, I've got 150 media. It's my first trip, Sandy's sick so I can't ring her, and I'm sitting there with this belligerent young man." This carried on backwards and forwards for a bit, and in the end, I just lost it. The mummy and me came out and I said, "Look, you're doing it. Otherwise you're all going to be in trouble and it will be a rotten week for everybody. It won't hurt you, it'll be good for you, da, 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 da," and went mad. And he just sat there. Then Harry said, "Yeah, let's do it, William. Get out the way, Colleen, I'm watching something," and that was it. So Harry got the deal signed for me. That was the photo shoot where the public first heard William speak. I asked an ITN guy to ask him a question. He said, "How's it going?" And William responded, "It was a great photo call. They laughed, they chatted, they did it brilliantly, the best one they'd ever done." It was a turning point and the media went crazy because they'd never heard him speak on camera before. It was a kind of 2 fingers up to me, I think. It was like, yeah, I can do it if I want to, when the mood takes me. I can deliver.